Welcome to Beyond the Frame. Art is more than what we see, it holds emotions, memories, and stories. In this podcast, we look past the canvas, the sculpture, the image, into the hearts and lives of the artists themselves. By sharing their journeys, we uncover the souls behind each piece and the creative spirits shaping contemporary East African art. I'm your host, Serena, and I'm so glad you're here. To open this very first episode of Beyond the Frame, it feels only fitting to welcome Gakunju Kaigwa, one of Kenya's most respected sculptors, whose monumental works in stone, wood, and metal have become landmarks in our artistic landscape. His practice explores identity, spirituality, and the human form, grounding contemporary East African art in both tradition and innovation. On a personal note, this conversation means a great deal to me. Kaigwa has been my mentor as an artist, and he was the one who first introduced me to the Kenyan art scene when I was just a teenager. It's an honor to begin this journey with the person who helped spark my own. So I just want to start by asking if you can tell us a bit about yourself and how you first began your journey as an artist.
Art was something that was always there, even from when I was a kid. I loved doodling, I loved drawing, and I was fortunate enough to be in two schools, my primary education and high school education, where I had real serious support from my teachers to encourage me to sort of explore my creative side. And so it was kind of like when it came to choosing what I wanted to do as an undergraduate, art kind of just seemed the right thing to do. Not realizing actually that because we were doing the bachelor degrees, we were being trained to be art teachers, not necessarily artists. That this would be something that I would be doing for the rest of my life. So, and it's been a wonderful journey, 45 odd years later. I think it's been really satisfying to do what I do. And I just have so much fun coming into my space every day. Just, I call it playing, it's not really work. So,
And how did you transition from painting to sculpture, right?
as an undergraduate, actually, my main area of interest is painting. And then one day, I saw a pile of like building stones, and I thought, let me see what I can do. So it was really kind of just something I was going to do, and then go back to my painting. And what happened was that when I started stone art, it came more natural to me, something that I didn't have to struggle. Painting was always about making lots of decisions about color composition and how I put my paintings together. Sculpture was a lot more, it just flowed a lot easier. So I did one and then another one and then another one. Finally, I just kind of put my brushes and paints aside and I said, let me just see what this is about. And just never look back.
I guess it's also the three-dimensionality of it. Like you're not just working in one thing, you're working in three. So it matters, I guess, how you're seeing it from every single
From every single direction it has to go.
What's been your favorite medium to work with in terms of sculpture?
Definitely stone. That's where I started, and that's kind of where I go back to. Every so often, I'll do some wood carvings, and then when I get the chance, I'll do a stone. I'll work with metal, because I do welding. I also do casting with resin with fiberglass. I've worked with lots of different mediums, but stone is always going to be, it's like my home,
Come back to all the time. Nice. And in terms of like your education, because you said you did a bachelor's in education for fine arts, how has that played a role in terms of, like, you were obviously my art teacher.
Yeah.
How have you balanced teaching art with actually practicing it as well? Have you ever felt like there's been a lack of, at any point, that you're the one that you're missing out on your own artwork just for the sake of teaching?
Yeah, there was sort of that. One of the advantages, obviously, of teaching part-time was that I'd have days off when I could come to my studio. The other thing also that teaching allowed me to do was to back off on the pressure to always be making work that I need to be selling, just to make a living, basically. So, yeah, it's a very delicate balance of that, because even teaching takes up a lot of energy. So on days when I thought I could teach and then come to my studio, I'd just be exhausted. Not get very much work done. But I'm now retired, so I'm sort of back in the space where I'm studio. And it's only in hindsight I could say that I really missed those days. I used to be here all the time, and I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, I mean, it's great seeing you here every time I come back this time around. I remember there was a period of time when I'd come here and I wouldn't see you at all. So I do really enjoy seeing you and working all the time on all your new sculptures over here. Okay, so I know you spoke about the coming across the pile of stones being your first entrance into sculpture. What first drew you to that?
It was something that I had sort of to do with the person who was the professor who taught us sculpture. It's not something I enjoyed doing um, due to the very regimented way in which it was taught. You had to do certain things, and you had to do them in a particular way. If you didn't agree with what you were doing, he would basically take over your work and just literally make it his, in a sense. So I'd sort of switched off sculpting as an option. But then when I started working on the stones, it was really just a curiosity. It was something I saw in a piece of stone. It was like a mark, some kind of irregularity. And I thought, that kind of looks like an eye, you know. And it's like, what would happen if I took this and that away? And then that was the first piece I ever made, was actually just a head, which I still own, actually. It's a piece out I don't think I'll ever sell. The thing about sculpture sometimes is it sort of makes itself. It sounds like a weird thing to say, but there's a form that's inside this material, and what you do is you use it. You just take away what's not necessary until you have the idea kind of come out of this material. So it was over very quickly, and then I did another one, and then another one, and another one, and then just never looked back. So over the years, I've tried going back to painting, but I have like maybe 5 or 6 unfinished painting because I could never go through to the end of the process. So I've stopped doing it. Yeah.
Do you ever feel like the pressure, like as someone who's like teaching as well as like someone who studied arts, do you ever feel like the pressure of education makes you less creative? Because I think I felt that as well in some ways. If there's always points where I've like in my free time I want to create, I want to paint, make sculptures, whatever it is. But then the minute that I'm told to do it by a teacher, it just feels like too much pressure and it just not something that I enjoy anymore. Have you ever felt that way in like your work or even seeing that with your own students?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about art is you have what's sort of an innate talent to begin with. I think everybody's born with what's called the gift. You have to have a certain aptitude. But then there's also an element of you have it, but then you have to sort of nurture it. And the nurturing is sort of the learning process where you kind of put your life in the hands of somebody who's more experienced than you. And this is where mentoring and teaching comes in. There's different levels of learning how to make art. There's sort of the technical, how do you use a brush? How do when you're doing things like the color set, which colors work together, which are complementary, and so on and so forth. Those are things that are sort of like you're learning the language of how to express yourself. You're talking about, which is sort of a necessary part of the process. And then once you're left free to kind of just find your own voice, which is really what should be the end product. You don't want to make art that looks like the person who taught you. You can be inspired by something, but inspiration doesn't mean that you're copying their work. What I think makes for successful artwork is when you have found your own voice and your work becomes recognizable as that's why. So you don't even have to be there. You develop an identity which nobody's going to do for you. That's after you've learned all the technical stuff. How does this tool operate? What kind of effect is it going to have on this material, that material? That stuff we won't help you.
Is that not something you think that people can figure out for themselves as well? Because I feel like there's some things that by doing you learn, or like by testing it out yourself.
Right, absolutely. And I think every teacher in some level wants to teach a certain basic idea that the student will then take to the next level. I think that's the mark of a successful sort of teaching process where your students actually become better at something than you are. And then there's also the element of why reinvent the wheel. There's certain elements. There's mistakes you make as a creator, as an artist over many years of experience that other people don't need to do. And I remember even as a student, even after after I graduated, I went on to do further studies. And that was after years of having been an artist, a sculptor. When I met a German stone painter, he kind of flipped my head upside down in terms of just how to sharpen my tools and even just how to handle tools. He was very like detailed and very disciplined. And I've always been grateful for the time I spent with him because I was like, okay, I thought I knew everything. Wow,
it's the learning from others' experiences,
absolutely,
other people's
absolutely.
mistakes.
No matter how experienced you are, you're always going to be learning. There's no time and place, I think, for any artist where you can just sit back and say, okay, now I know everything. Yeah.
I think there's always room for improvement.
Absolutely.
I actually remember once when I was maybe 16 and I was painting now one of my favorite pieces that I painted. And you told me that if anyone ever asks you what your masterpiece is, you always have to say it's not complete yet.
Yeah.
And that's something that's always stuck with me.
Absolutely.
Your sculptures carry a lot of depth and themes. Would you be able to speak a little bit about those things behind what influences your sculpture work? and what you'd hope that the viewers take from your work as well?
Back when I was a painter and still at university, there was a certain style we had developed over a period of like 5 years, where people would see any of our work and they'd say that's a student from to university. And part of that was because we all dealt with issues that were what's referred to as social moment. You know, it was like going out into the streets and seeing how people live, and then capturing that, just everyday life, and that kind of translated over into my sculptures as well. There was always for me a very important element of telling a story. I think it's important that you walk away from it with some kind of an experience of having been in the presence of something that has something to say. And I'm not saying I'm against people who make purely abstract artwork, or to each his own. Everybody brings their own experience to looking at art. So sometimes you don't want to give too much away. And the interesting thing about doing that is you learn so much about your own work because you're seeing it through other people's eyes. People have walked up to some of my pieces and come up with a conversation where I'm going, wow, I never even thought of that when I was making it. But they're bringing their own life experiences to it. And I always find that so much fun. Right? People are interpreting, reinterpreting my work for me through their own. And then we don't make artwork for ourselves. It's something we need to share. So that's important to get.
But in itself, I guess art is also a way of expressing your own experiences and
It is, absolutely.
So how would you say that your experiences, life experiences, your journey is also shapes like what you put through into art?
Absolutely. And sometimes it'll be, people always ask, so what inspires you to make your art? And it can be anything. It can be an article in the newspaper, something I saw on TV, something I saw on my way to work by the side of the road. You never know when it's going to kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if I could put a spin on that and have a conversation about whatever that particular subject is. So I've started realizing that I'm working in series where I'll put a certain sort of number of pieces together, kind of all share a theme, which is really interesting. It's different from where I've just did one of pieces before, which really don't have any sort of connection to each other in terms of a theme or an idea, but as pieces that stand alone by themselves. So,
and how do you define when that series is over?
It just lets you know. You could go on technically, indefinitely working on something, but I think you get to a point where if you just take off anymore or you touch it again, you're not adding anything to it. It's already saying what it needs to say. You can even tell sometimes when something's been overworked. Yeah.
It's almost like it gets diluted, or like even for me in like my own architectural drawing, it's always about choosing what the right drawings communicates enough. Because the more you draw, the more you communicate, the more your message gets diluted and too much information.
Absolutely. Yes. I think it's about keeping it simple to some degree. You can tell a story in 5 minutes, or you can stretch it into half an hour and still say the same thing. But who's going to sit for half an hour listening to you? It gets to where you're repeating yourself. If you can do it in 5 minutes, do it in 5 minutes.
And in terms of like working with the furniture, and that's like from what I've seen, primarily all the like wood carving.
Right.
How do you go about that process of like starting from say your research or like your inspiration to the final product? What is the full process?
Again, it starts with an idea, and then I'll do a series of drawings. Maybe reference something I saw somewhere. You think, how would that look if I put this sort of a spin on it? How would that look if, I made it out of a material. And when I work with any of my wooden functional sculptures, I'll start with a block of material.
And does that come from the trunk?
It'll be a trunk of a tree, or some section of a tree, and then it'll always be just one piece that I've carved from one piece of wood. The carpenter approach, where you have joints, where you're adding things together. That is not the way I work. It's more for I'm just taking a log and then just taking away whatever I need to get the idea. So
makes sense. And what about for stonework? How does that work? How do you work with a block of stone? Turn it into
pretty much the same thing. If you get the basics of carving, what tools to use and what effects you can get, you can carve a bar of soap, or you can carve something like granite, which is probably one of the hardest materials. The creative process pretty much follows the same series of like making your very large cuts right at the beginning. Then you go in with smaller tools and use your files and your rasps. And each time you're using these tools, you're removing the tool marks from the previous tool until you're down to sandpaper, like really, really refining the surface before you put a finish on it.
Which would you say is easier to work with?
Stone, actually. I
Really?
don't know.
That surprises me.
Stone because it tends to have um, no grain, to be honest. A piece of wood is these strands that are all kind of tied together, all moving in the same direction. Even in language, you hear going against the grain.
Yeah.
The grain is the way the wood is formulated. And if you try and cut sideways, you tear the grain. It doesn't actually work very well unless you're going with the grain, whether it's up or down. So that kind of controls what you can do with wood. Because, or rather, the wood controls what you can do with it, because you have to be very careful. The grain sometimes changes. Even if it's going straight up and down, you're cutting, okay, when you're tearing the knots, and then you have to turn the knots, start cutting the other way. So there's all these little traps, kind of, when you're carving wood, which you don't have with stone. Stone you can hit from any direction. It's a lot more forgiving in terms of how you're going to run with it. It's up, down, sideways. I advise people wanting to learn how to climb to start with a piece of stone before trying. And that's the way I went for it as well. I carved stone for many years before I tried my first time. And I'm glad that I did.
Have there ever been times where you've just had to completely scrap a piece of wood?
Oh, many times. Many times. Oh yeah.
Did it still happen?
Those early days. No, not so much. Not so much. You learn very quickly, I think, over time, what's going to work, what's not. And so, yeah, in my early days, some of them I'd force through, like maybe you're working on something like a piece of stone, you hit it a bit too hard. It was well, it's inexperience. You hit it too hard and break off something you weren't expecting to break off. And then it's like, now I have to change my idea because the thing with carving is once you've taken it off, that's it. Unless you want all these, glue, you can glue it back on. But then that kind of devalues your work. And there's some pieces when you're not in the right mood for it, where you're kind of it's just like you're forcing and you very quickly learn what works and what doesn't. And you have to just say, okay, there's no way I can say it. And it's okay, it's fine. And then the other thing about years of experience is becoming a lot more selective about what it is you're going to do.
And I guess more selective of the materials as well.
You're more selective of what material you're going to use, especially if you have a few that you can choose from. So this is going to work in this material. This is not very good in this material. So you learn to kind of tie in whatever idea you have, whatever scale you're thinking, whatever finish you're thinking, what material you're going to sort of match it to.
From your own creative spirit, it's always been connected to the human body.
I'm more interested in it.
So what drew you to that?
I don't know. I think the relatability is such a word. When people look at other human forms captured in whatever material, there's a certain sort of affinity, a sort of connectedness that you don't get with any other subject.
I remember when I was doing my high school art pieces and I was focusing on certain parts of the body that were apparently the most hard to paint, like the hands, the feet, the neck. And I think it was either you or another art teacher of mine who was telling me that it's quite interesting when you're focusing on the human body because it's something that people see every day. So when there's any sort of error in it, it's something that people notice a lot more. How do you feel like that with your own work?
The kind of work I do exaggerates. So I don't do realistic work. Like if you took a snapshot or unless it's a commission where I'm doing a portrait of something, it has to look like a certain person. The hands and the feet for me are so what exaggerate my pieces. So they'd be larger than you'd expect them to be on a form that's a particular size. And the enlarging is just to draw attention to it. Because people notice that.
Yes, in a sense, it's similar to mannerism, of your style of mannerism. I was trying to where things are a little more exaggerated.
Yeah.
And how did you figure out that? That's what worked.
It wasn't a deliberate sort of, I am going to do this. It's just something I noticed over time. I spent 4 months with this artist called John Odoch Amin. And he was a sculptor in his own right. He was a stone carver, amazing man. And he was also a welder, a lot of welding steel pieces as well, which I'd never done before. And there was my work before I had met him, and then there was my work that was very different after. Because one, I was using a different material to express myself. He'd take me through, I'd get to somewhere I'm stuck, and he'd come over and go, oh, right, okay, try doing this and this and this. And go through this material, examine the void. Because my work was very blockish to begin with. And he taught me how to just go right through the material and start looking at inner spaces within the same piece. And I'm eternally grateful to him because he's the one who opened up that new style that I got also, just because I could play with more of the material by going through it. I could create all these exciting sort of, the heads and the faces and the hands and the feet. So that's kind of what I like.
Do you think, I know from what I've experienced in the art scene here, there's not just the formal training of like going to university to study art, but there's a lot of apprenticeship here that takes place. And I think that's maybe something that's like passed down a lot generationally as well. How do you feel like that still plays a role?
It's sort of a newer phenomenon. There was something very academic and theoretical about it at university because they wanted art teachers, really artists. But what's happening is that same university is allowing the students to come and spend, as part of their program, up to 2 or 3 months in a working environment, just to give them that experience of what is it like to be an artist as something we're doing for a career. And it's something that's catching on. And I think it's that mentoring is so important because I know how it worked for me. It's something that I really enjoy doing. There's nothing better than seeing that aha moment in somebody's, how did you get that effect? How did you do that? Or, there's this sort of almost magical, mystical thing about making art where people can't figure out what you do until you explain it. And then you go, oh, so that's how that happens. Yeah, and there's a lot of satisfaction as a mentor or a teacher when you have that moment where it's like, oh, okay, I see how they do that. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I think it's so important as well seeing the process behind the work.
Absolutely.
And that's such a big part of to me actually even more so than the final product is seeing how things happen and like behind the scenes behind it.
I keep a log of all of the pieces that I do as I do them. I'll take a sequence of pictures and show the process.
We do the same. Yeah. And it's quite interesting always to go back and see how far you've come from not just the beginning product, but also from like your first piece to your last piece. It's like the constant improvement. I guess that what I'm also interested in is a bit about like your journey outside of Kenya. Where did you move abroad to? Why did you decide to come back?
The first time I studied abroad was actually purely by coincidence. It happened to be in a gallery where I used to sell my work when I was asked to go help out with setting up some artworks in a new space, a new restaurant, what was then the International Casino. And when we got there, we met the director of the casino and he was walking around. And the gallery owner challenged me. She said, well, we're making this place so beautiful for you. Why don't you do something in return? And sponsor one of our artists to go to Italy. He's an Italian gentleman. And I said, yes, sure. I said, we immediately agreed. And she goes, how about this young man here? And I turn around and I'm like, me? And he goes, yeah. Sure. What would you like to go there and do? And, I was totally caught unaware. So I thought, well, there's things like residencies, but I'd have to do some homework and find out what's available. So I kind of relaxed. And 2 weeks later was the opening of this restaurant before we entered. And he walks up to me and he says, what are you doing about that? I said, sponsor to Italy. And I thought, oh my God, this guy is serious. He says, if you don't want it, I can give it to somebody else. I said, no. So I went into town and there was an Italian company that used to import stone, beautiful marble countertops and tiles and so on. And they got in touch with the university. It's called the Academia di Belle Arti. It's the city where Carrara, where they used to get their stone. And then back then there were fax machines, so they faxed an application for me. And then I took it to the Italian Institute, they translated it for me, I sent it back, and they accepted me as a student. And so I went back to Vico, who was the director at the casino, and I said, I've been accepted into the school of Carrara. And he said, good, you can only need to learn Italian. I want to pay for you to take Italian lessons. He said, I'm leaving in a month. I said, no, you'll get enough to get you around when you get there.
Do you still speak Italian?
So not very well. This was 1988. So, suddenly I'm on a plane. And I'm like, wow, okay. And I arrived with my suitcase and I'm here. And so I ended up spending 8 months in Carrara, attending classes which were all in Italian. So I got really kind of like bombarded by the language of Carrara is famous for all the marble that Michelangelo and Italian greats used to do. And so there's lots of workshops for visiting artists, sculptors to just come and rent spaces. And they give you, sort of an area, and they've got stone you can buy right in the same space. So I got one of those spaces, and so I'd be in school and I'd be in the workspace as well. I noticed that. And it was 8 months of pure bliss, just traveling around Italy. So his artwork was just amazing. I mean, I equate an artist going to Italy. Like, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this, but it's like, they talk about the Hajj to every Muslim. It's kind of like that. I preach the gospel of Italy and all that. So if you ever get a chance to go to Italy, don't 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 pass it up, because it just the level of quality of work, the history, just you're in this space looking at something that's like you can't believe human beings made it.
Yeah.
There was so many breathtaking moments, just looking at artwork, sometimes from artists you've never even heard of. For every one famous artist, there's probably 10, 15 others you've never heard of who are just as good. So I came back so inspired. So I went to the stone carver and I came back as somebody ready to take on anything, everything. So I started welding, I started working with wood. The scale of my work changed as well. I used to make sort of coffee table size pieces. Now I was working much with that, because I'm looking at things that, the David in Florence is, I think, 18, it's like 6 meters tall. That's all one piece of stone. I've been thinking really small. In fact, at some point I was like, how do I dare call myself an artist? This sort of excellence. And then, in the end, I knew I have a voice. I have something I need to say. And it's while I was there that I started looking for the next place to go to, because I'd never traveled. And while in Italy, I applied for a course in Scotland to do a master's degree. It was an MPhil in public. So as soon as I got back, I was accepted into the University of Dundee. And then I had to fight tooth and nail to get a sponsorship from the British Council. And they eventually, so I think I wore them down. I was just there all the time. It's like, I need to go. So I attended the University of Dundee 92, 93, the year, and came back with a master's. And then while I was in Scotland, I was applying to a bronze foundry from New Jersey, in the US, that had an apprenticeship program. So in 1994, September is when I left to go to the Johnson Atelier, it's called Technical Institute of Sculpture. And that's what I learned, how to cast in bronze and silver. And that was a 4 year. Yeah, I've been very, very blessed. The way the apprenticeship program worked was that you worked during the day for paying clients. And then in the evening, the building stayed open until 10 in the evening. And you could do your own work. And you got paid for what you did from 8 to 5. So that pay was enough for rent, for food, and everything. So I worked and then paid my way with whatever I made during the day. And then by the 4 years that I left, I made quite good work. So I had quite a few sculptures and bronze.
And what made you choose to come back to Kenya?
So it's kind of, I've been away for 9 years straight. Never been back. I had family. My kids were here. So at some point, I was just saying, now is the time. I need to.
So how did you end up at Ghana?
I was a visiting artist to a company, a stone carver from Zimbabwe, who I admired for a very, very long time. He came to do a residency, and I was requested to be one of maybe 3 sculptors who were kind of just hanging out with him, because otherwise he was just in a space where there was nothing else going on. And so we'd go there every day and hang out, work together, and then in the evening we'd go have a drink and that kind of thing. So when the spaces were finally ready, and I had been sort of there for this process for that, I think it was about a month that he was around, I just thought, let me just take the space. And that Pune had always been something that I was attached to, because the founder was somebody who was a friend of mine. We kind of kept touch over the years. And I was sort of there for the first 1 or 2 formative years, and then had to leave. And then when I came back, it was kind of like, I think this is where I belong. I like the sense of community. There's artists who like to be on their own. It's not something very far away from anybody to be able to create. But I like having people around me. I can share my experiences, share my tools. We can have conversations, we can inspire each other. Yeah, that sense of community.
I get that, because every time I come here, I feel so inspired by all of the artists here. So I guess the next question is what is the biggest challenge you face as an artist, and how did you?
Well, some of the challenges I think most artists face is it's kind of like you go through these phases where you've heard of a writer's block. I think artists get the same sort of thing where you're not getting ideas, or anything you're trying isn't working. And at first I used to really panic, because they'll be like, oh, I've lost it, and it's something that you don't know where to go and get back. You know what I mean? this thing that makes you the creator of all these things. And so I realized it's a cyclical thing. So it's like seasonal. If you wait it out long enough, it comes back. And then that's when ideas are just dropping out of my ears. It's like, oh, I want to do this and this and this and this. I guess, it's part of the rhythm of life. You can't be creative all the time. So over time, I learned that's not something to panic. The other thing too is always how to make a living. How do you make work that is going to help you keep working? There's one of the dreaded questions I'm asked by people is, I've shown them my artwork. Then they say, how much do you want for it? And the minute money comes into the equation, it becomes this. I used to think it would be easier over time to have that conversation because you are making a product.
Yeah.
As much as you put your heart and soul into something, it is thing in the end product that you're then going to have to market and you're going to have to find a buyer. I've been fortunate enough to have a few collectors kind of consistently buying it. Somehow I've managed to make a living, but I know, everybody struggles. Even right here at one, it's a very random thing. You can go 3 months without making a sale and then sell 4 or 5 pieces on the same day. There's nothing consistent about it. So you're constantly sort of out there, just by the grace of the universe. You keep doing what you do, and then somehow the universe provides. It's not a way to get rich.
I think it's
unless you break through into sort of like a sort of international market. But you do it because it's your passion, because that's why you wake up in the morning. Selling work is always one of the major. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's. I think passion is exactly what I was just about to speak about because I think it's always hard to balance passion with money because, like you said, your work is your play here.
Yes.
And it's a little bit like I find the same for myself. Like when I am so passionate about something, I'm going to do it regardless of whether I get paid or not. But obviously, as an artist, full-time artist, it's like you're doing it for the passion, but it's also something that needs to bring income to you, and it's so hard to.
So that you can keep doing what you
Yeah. Must be so hard to balance as well.
It is.
How is education also? But like, is that something that you chose to do in terms of like earning a steady income, or is it something that you chose to do because you're also passionate about it, like teaching?
Teaching is something I love doing. In fact, I really miss it. There's days I'm like, I've been in school right now. The act of teaching itself, not all the other stuff that comes with it, but just that being able to share knowledge and experience, I think is something that I really, really enjoy.
I mean, I wouldn't be here without you.
Yeah, and I would still be doing it if I wasn't past the age of what they call the mandatory age of retirement. Yeah.
How have you felt that the Kenyan art scene has grown? Like you've obviously been in it for years, for decades. How would you like describe the transition of like the growing Kenyan art scene, right, in East Africa? And I'd say, I guess, also because, like you mentioned, there was that generation in Kenyatta University where everyone was on that like social commentary through their artwork. And I think that that's something that's really stayed as well in the Kenyan art scene. Like a lot of artists these days there's a lot of social commentary, a lot of like documenting everyday life. And is that just, do you think, a specific generation, or do you think that it's something that's continuously growing, adapting?
I mean, in terms of subject matter, there's never any limitations to a certain generation, and there's themes that are always there to be explored. Like ongoing. Society changes, culture changes. If that's where you're looking for your inspiration, you're sort of documenting the time in which you live. And some of the most beautiful artworks, in my opinion, are kind of like artist snapshots of the time when they lived, however many years ago. They're leaving a sort of a testament. Like this is what it was like to be alive. This in my time. As part of the storytelling, I was saying it's so important. As for the art scene, my first solo show was in 1982 at Lyons Concerts, right? And then very shortly after that, I put my work into a gallery called Gallery Matatu, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. And so, from 82, there were artists who were much older than me who were kind of bunched together as a generation because we were showing in Gallery Matatu at the same time. I was sort of the younger end of that generation. Names like Timothy Boyd, Jack Katarika, people even like Eddie Jao, a lot of that generation actually came through like an art school in Kampala. And then at the time that I was becoming an artist, I had lots of issues of like art was not something that was cool, becoming a musician, anybody in theater, or an artist was looked down as, well, are you sure you want to do that? How are you going to survive? Um, it was associated with, just a loose way of life. You're someone who takes drugs. It was sort of this stereotype of an artist as some sort of loser. And so we had a lot of parents telling their kids, you're going to do medicine, you're going to be a lawyer, these reputable careers. I had that for my father all the time. Because I said, so when are you going to get a job? 10 years into being an artist, he'd always be like, so you've got a job yet? As if being an artist was something like adolescence that I was going to go through and then grow up and become a responsible human being. But there was that resistance, and it's still there, but it's not as much. I now find that parents are opening up. When you've got parents bringing their kids to places like going and saying, my kid likes dabbling with drawing and for playing with clay, can you help them? Because they're really interested in art. That's something that would never have happened 30, 40 years ago. And art has become something that's almost a viable, it's looked at more respectfully than it used to be back in my day. There is still the problem of it not being in built into a lot of the educational systems that are being in place. So, but then, regardless of that, if you have the artistic bone, if you will, as somebody who wants to be creative, you'll find your way around that. Whether you went through a school that had an art department or not, you'll still find your way. There's a lot of artists who are self-trained, do amazing work. As long as that passion is there, it's not going to stop. In terms of the market itself, we've got a sort of a bigger middle class that are willing to invest in local artists, which was not always the case back in the day. You find it's purely sort of expatriates or tourists who go Kenyan artwork. But now it's sort of a mix, like people with disposable income actually come here to go and to buy directly from the artists. So yeah, it's definitely improved. There's a lot. I did a affordable art show at the museum last year, and the day I took in my artwork, I couldn't believe how many. Those, because it was like the day when you just come in with your 2 or 3 pieces and they decide what they're going to hang and what they're not. And just looking around at who showed up, kind of work who was showing up, I just felt very encouraged that art is alive and well. There's a lot of young talent still coming up that we still haven't seen yet. So yeah.
Do you think there's also a lot more spaces, like art spaces in Kenya? I know even in my lifetime, I've noticed a lot more growing, and especially in the last few years.
Definitely.
Do you think that plays a part in?
Absolutely. Yeah. I wish we had more showcases, galleries. A city in Nairobi size should have more galleries than it does. But it's a tough business. It's something that's not easy to go into.
So, where do you see your art evolving in the next few years?
So I'd really like to work on more monumental pieces, on a sort of larger scale, fewer but larger. And the risk with doing large works is, of course, if they're a commission and you have terms and conditions where it's paid for before you even do it. It's a bit of a mixed bag, because when you're doing a commission, it's not always what you want to do. You have a client say, well, I think we should do this, and making corrections and so on. So you have to be in a place where you can kind of compromise without taking too much of yourself away from the work you're doing. The best commissions are the ones where somebody just says, I leave you to do whatever you want. But those are few and far between. The commissions are one way to guarantee when they're doing larger than life, so really big onto it. One of the things about sculpture is people find it so much harder to buy sculpture than paintings. Painting goes on. Sculpture commands the space.
Yeah.
So, and there's people who say that they never have a sculpture in their house because it's a spirit, it's a presence. It's like having another person in the house kind of thing. There are people who strongly believe in, nothing three-dimensional.
Yeah.
So it's a harder sell for a sculptor, especially when it's on a large scale.
What advice would you give to young artists trying to pursue either, I know you've moved out of the painting space, but either art in 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional?
In order to be successful, especially on a larger scale, like international specifically, it's not just about the quality of the work you do, it's the consistency. How long have you been doing it? What kind of a track record? Because people will look at your work and say, wow, that's not what this person was dealing with 2, 3 years ago. Of course, there's that growth process that happens. But at the same time, you do want a certain sort of recognizability about you. So there's sort of like a branding that goes on. So people will know, oh, that's my so-and-so. That's my so-and-so. And very often when people come in to buy work, are looking for a name as well as the author. So, I know who's that artist who's showing me. South Africa, they've shown it in Europe, and so on. So it's a process. A lot of young artists expect from day one. I've got artists in here, even the ones who come here on their apprenticeship, where they'll have made an art piece, and you ask them, so how much would you want for that? 300,000. You're barely out of art school. That's not what you're going to get for that. And just to give you an example, there's a piece that I saw back in 1987. Probably got maybe 40,000 shillings for it. And the value of that piece now, because of the consistency and the time that I've been making artwork, is many, many times that, over $1 million for the same thing. But at the time I got the 6,000, the 8,000, the 10,000. That was great. That was, you start low and then you build your way up, because you're not going to be making money from day one. And if you're doing it for the money, then that's the wrong thing. That's the it has to be the passion, and that has to come through, because very often you'll find artists who find like a certain style or a certain, they click into something that's kind of marketable, and then because that's what's selling, that's where they get stuck.
It's like sticking to trends.
And then they just repeat and repeat years and years and years of making the same thing over and over again. And that stops their growth as an artist, because they have a ready market for a certain style, a certain theme, a certain way of working. And it's one of those traps that's very, very dangerous, I think, for any creator. So the key is passion. You have to have an interest to do. If you're just doing it because you've got bills to pay, that's maybe you need to be an accountant or something.
Just to wrap up, I'm going to move to the rapid fire questions.
They're not too rapid.
Not too rapid. But if you weren't an artist, what would you be doing?
I can't even imagine. I can't imagine not being an artist.
Okay.
Seriously.
That's a good enough answer for me. A book, film, or artwork that's recently inspired you? Or even something you've seen on the side of the road, anything that's inspired you recently?
AI has become something I'm really fascinated with. Yeah, the stuff that people are doing with artificial intelligence is just actually just mind-blowing. Scary too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember even on Pinterest, for me, it's always a thing of not even being able to tell what's real, what's not.
Right. Yeah. So that's something to look at.
Favorite spots in Kenya to unwind?
Home.
Home? Okay, fair.
I'm a bit of a home guy. Come to studio, go home. That's it.
One artist, living or dead, that you would love to collaborate with?
I'd like to meet up with my mentor, John Bunch, again. I haven't seen him in over 30 years. That would be a dream. Like reconnecting with him, just to show him where I am.
Of course, that would be so amazing.
Just,
I mean, it's always nice, like even for me to come back and reconnect with you, because the personal connection, I guess.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for tuning in, and a big thank you to Kaigwa here for sharing his journey with us today. Art is always more than what we see, and I hope this conversation has helped you feel that too. Until next time, keep looking beyond the frame.